Hello everybody, and welcome to Mitchell Giddings Fine Arts. Thank you for choosing to spend your evening with us. Just by being here, you're supporting the gallery and all of our incredible artists. Before I go too much farther, I'd also like to thank the Vermont Arts Council, with whom we share a link and space on the Vermont Arts Council calendar, Brattleboro Community Television, and Ames Hill Film and Video Productions, Andy Reichsman, who is operating the camera right now, and his wife Kate Purdy, who film and edit and make available our artist talks and other special events. Also, we have Emily Mason's 2 books for sale next to the desk. There are no surprises as to the reason we've been anticipating this event so eagerly. We're all really fortunate to share the stage with Emily Mason, our friend and neighbor, supporter of our town and our arts, and an extraordinary artist whose paintings and prints take us all to a new and wondrous place. Joining Emily from New York is her remarkable right hand, artist and gallery assistant Steve Rose, our contact with the nuts and bolts part of assembling inventory and information for this exhibit. So thank you again, and please help me welcome Emily Mason.
So this is an amazing crowd. I was just saying to Emily that I don't think we get a crowd like this in New York ever. So this is a little more intimidating than I expected it to be honest.
I don't know anything.
Thank you all for coming. I also wanted to do a special shout out to our friend who came up from New York, Lisa Mackey, who is also one of Emily's printers that's represented here, and we call her the alchemist. You like to call her the wizard. We both call her the genius. So she's going to be called on probably to correct us many times today. I guess really what this show is about is 32 years of Emily's work. And when I was approached by PD and Jim, we're looking at what we had in the collection, and we had quite a bit of the old stuff that we just started like pulling out of the old folders. And some of this stuff hadn't been seen since, I would say, 20 years. Right. And so it was like Christmas for me.
But you had it all organized.
We organized.
Well, for me too, because I sort of recognized things that I hadn't seen in years, so it brought up memories.
Yeah, as we opened them up, Emily would go through, I remember doing this, this, and this. And it was like, it would transport us to a time, but also unveil a little bit of her process that, I hadn't been aware of. I mean, I was so familiar with her paintings, but the print work, other than what she's been doing recently with Lisa and Janice, not a lot of this older stuff.
But I think of my prints as printed paintings. I don't think of them as a print. Actually, print is a bad word in the gallery world. Right? So
it is kind of funny that way, yeah. They don't like the additions.
They shy away from print.
Yeah.
So.
But Emily's prints are like no other prints in New York. You go to the New York Print Show and they have that quality of her paintings and that they're so unique, each one. In fact, she has very few editions for that reason. Each one is a bit of an experiment. And what I like about them is each of these periods represent a slightly different collaboration with a different printer. The printer and the character of the printer is so prevalent in what Emily's doing. They all feel like Emily, but there's like a little bit of something they're taking out and bringing out in her approach, what she's hacking, as I like to say, in their process, and vice versa, and coming up with some beautiful things. So I guess to start, enough about me talking, it's going to be Emily, you came to hear. I just want to kind of set us up with describing each of the different periods that we have here. And you can see more examples when you walk around, but we start over here on the left-hand side with Tamarin from 1985.
Right. And there was just working on my own without a printer, so it almost feels like a collage, that one. Which
I thought it was
yeah,
you had a lot of Jean Coulet or something going on in there, but it's not.
No.
And then we have in 1987 we have GTW Garner Tullis, which is out in Santa Barbara.
Yeah.
And you've always described to me that very special thing about their press.
Oh, they had an airplane motor press. It was like the bed was 30 feet long or something, because they did enormous things.
And it was almost like a book press, right?
Oh, that was one of them. The other was a book press, and the pressure came right down.
So
there were no splooshes, right. Right.
And in that particular case, and a lot of those, you were actually working directly on the plate. and then just splooshing it, as you say, down onto the paper.
Right.
So there must have been a lot of not knowing what was going to happen.
All the time.
Which is your favorite thing?
It's sort of like if you bake a loaf of bread, you put it in the oven, you just hope it's going to raise and be good. So it's the yeast.
And then we move along, and we have the work that you did. Well, you started working with Janice, and like I would say 88, 89 through your experiments with Soft the Sun.
Right, and I think it was with Soft the Sun that I discovered the Carborundum.
Janice Stemmerman is also is represented behind me here. These are the more recent ones, but she is. They came up with a method that they worked with together called Carborundum printing.
Well, I sort of got in trouble, and I needed a way out. I needed to. Working with Carborundum is like working with an aquatent, only since I was doing it on plastic, it's above the surface, where an aquatent is actually etched into the plate. So the thing I like about working with the plates, plastic plates, when I say Carborundum, I take a Carborundum grit, and we all know what Carborundum is if you've bought black sandpaper at the hardware store. That's Carborundum. So I mix the grit with just a white glue and paint with it. And the thing I like about working on plastic is you can sort of see what's going to, you hold a couple up together and you can sort of play with what you might get.
So I'll see Emily in the studio, and she'll be like going through all these. She has a stack of these that she'll be going through and layering them up like so. And like looking at them together, flipping them around, coming up with different configurations.
Perfectly square. So
and that's just part of that process. Now, I made a mistake. You guys didn't discover it, but there was actually somebody, Tony Kirk, that turned you on to it as...
Well, Miro actually used it, yeah.
And it was something that Moreau and... So it dates back quite far, but Emily, I think, kind of revolutionized it with how she was working with it.
I have that Miro print where he's inked sections of it up front of my studio, and it's all, the colors are all bright and clean. It's not affected by the metal of the plate.
So that's why you wanted to have that really clear, pure color?
Yes, absolutely. My whole work is about color. Yes.
No doubt. I just want you to say it. And then, of course, we have the work that you did with Lisa, which spans all different kinds of methods, from silk Collagraph, which I couldn't even begin to try to describe what that's about.
It's like making a big ink pad.
Okay.
So, sort of. Yeah. It begins with the ink pad, and then you work acrylic on top of it. So. I think the blue one, the one on the...
There's that one.
Yes. And you ink up individually. You card the ink onto the plate, and then, right? And then run it through the press. And there's a magic about running through the press. You don't know what's there. And then you sort of flip the blankets back, and it makes a bump that comes out when the press leaves the plate. It makes this bump, and you flip the blankets back, and you look, and you see what you have. And then if it needs something else, then you put another plate on top, and you never know.
How immediate is that response once you've...
What do you mean, when you first see it?
When you first see it, there's an aha moment, or, you know, and then...
Then you need another one, or just let it... And sometimes things change as they dry. Mm-hmm. So you have to, or as they flatten out, yeah.
Well, I noticed that when you guys work, particularly recently with your solar plate method, sometimes you're layering up so to a point where you can almost see a skin on top of the plate. I mean, on top of the print. It's amazing. It's quite special. And that's the new method you've been working with, solar plate, Xerox.
Xerox is really interesting. It's, instead of stone like a lithograph, you have a piece of paper, and you can print from that. And it's, the leaf is going to have to explain exactly what that is. But it's a lot of, it opens many doors.
Can you explain that right now while we're on it?
With the printing from the Xerox.
From the Xerox, yeah.
Okay, well, essentially, when you make a Xerox or a laser print, okay, it's got a plastic coating on there. The toner is the plastic, and then you have the paper, okay? So that actually magically becomes a lithograph, because the water, if you'd wet that, the water would go absorb into the white areas of the paper. But where the Xerox is, or the toner is, it's going to repel. So if you have a little brayer, you can roll as long as the paper is wet, and where the Xerox is will be where it's repelled the water, thereby taking the grease of the ink. So it's really, it's a lithograph, but it's a piece of paper, so we can make many of them. We can print them in different colors, and then like literally lay it right on top of the print. So we can layer those colors very immediately. And it tends to not make as much of a tone as, say, the Collagraph or the Carborundum. So that blue and purple one that you see in the center, the small one, is very kind of clearly the two Xeroxes laying over each other. And so it has that lithographic quality of having the translucency of the ink. So it's quite exciting because it's very immediate.
Is this regular Xerox, or you work with somebody in a Xerox shop? I mean, how do you? No,
it's literally a Xerox. So I have like a laser printer, like it's a laser printer, but a black and white laser or a Xerox, and I just print them out right in the studio, and then we can layer them. So a lot of the more recent pieces were just very small, because we could do many changes and many different trials and layering, and we'd kind of work on maybe 20 at a time, maybe, like what was a day's run, and then let them dry, and then work on them again and again, layering over and over. So
what's being Xeroxed?
what's being Xeroxed?
Well, don't we sometimes work on Mylar first?
Yeah, but I think
And we
you
did the
were
black and
using
white, black, just with India ink?
A lot of what you were using was, remember the Zen watercolor
Oh, right.
thing? I don't know what that's called, but it's
Oh, yeah, it was a toy I got at
at
the art store.
You got it at the Rubin Museum, I think.
Oh, okay.
Okay, and it was like a stone where if you wet it, you can paint on it. And there was a whole series you did of that, where she would paint and then they would photograph and paint and photograph. And we actually had that in the drawer at a certain point because it wasn't really giving us all the variation. And we kind of went back to other things, the solar plate, because it gave a lot more variation. And then recently we found them in the drawer, then we found the Xeroxes in the drawer, and we started using those too.
And can you explain the solar plate? It's sensitized. So
Okay.
if this isn't too technical, but
Any
it's-
questions so far? Okay.
Lisa teaches a master class in this.
Is it just, it's a single, so you take a single print from each Xerox, so if you're doing an edition, you'd run you'd have 10 Xeroxes of the same plate, essentially.
Well, you
You
can
can
print
run
that
multiples on the
same
same piece of
Xerox
paper?
if you get it going correctly. You could print maybe 6. It's going to kind of fall apart as it goes, but it also kind of loses some of the toner, so it kind of opens up. So I've used them over and over again. But yes, you can also print like 5 of those, and then for every print you could use that. But what's nice is there's something like a pronto plate where you can run a piece of, it's like a acetate through the press and then ink that. But the Xerox I like because it's extremely immediate, and it's just not very precious. You can just print it again. It's right in the computer, so you print it again. Yeah.
It's about as close as I've ever seen Emily get to digital art. Really is.
Well, the solar plate is a photo process as well. So you want to know about that? Sure. Yeah. Well, it's really technically a photopolymer plate. Okay, so essentially the plate is used for printing labels. That's more or less what the product is about. Is like a black and white. But by putting a dot screen in, which is it's a computer-generated aquatint screen, so it's not a mechanical dot. You can get a range of grays, and a tremendous range of grays from your transparency. So again, you can take a piece of acetate, just any kind of piece of acetate or frosted mylar, and Emily can paint with, say, the Speedball block printing ink, just a black ink, and she can paint anything she wants on that piece. And then what we do is we take the solar plate, which is coated with a photopolymer, and we put that, I put it first with an aquatint screen. So I shoot this dot, very fine dot, irregular dot. And then we shoot the painting, literally, with all its fine detail and everything. And it's then rinsed in water, and where the black is, it allows the light not to harden in that black area, thereby creating pits into the photopolymer plate, which then can be printed like an etching. So I have to give credit to, for sure, Dan Weldon for the solar plate, because he has not really invented the solar plate, but he has invented the kind of process of this very detailed process. So I learned that from him, and then would go expose the plates with his knowledge and timing and all that.
You actually had to take it out to his place or his barn?
No,
He had some
we
kind of
would use Lower East Side Print Shop
Okay.
light table. So I could just go in with all the transparencies that you made, and then the aquatint screen and the plates, and then we would just print them. And what's interesting about the plates is that they last for a very long time, and they can be printed many times over. So by taking the same plates, they're kind of like this vocabulary for Emily. And so we'd have a stack of plates, and we could keep reusing the plates. And we actually can print them upside down because they're sort of flexible. So we could print them over and over and over again. So we could print the same thing over, or we could expose it in different ways. So sometimes I would expose it several different light, medium, and dark, and then those could be layered again and again.
And that sort of mirrors the use of the carborundum, layering. So
Yeah.
it's the same process.
Yes, really.
Yeah, if you look at a lot of these plates on the Carborundum and also of the solar plates, you'll sometimes see these like residuals where one thing might be a prominent form in one piece, it'll be a shadow in another. And Emily's really great about doing that. I like what Lisa just described as her vocabulary, being able to use these things and navigate and create a language with those elements through a series of one-time gestures.
They even get names, the plates, right? Like we could say sploosh plate or hurricane plate or whatever. And so it would kind of be like a language of color and a language of names of plates that we could
The
talk.
family, right.
Yeah. Very good.
Well, I really do. I mean, I thought I think of this, and this is like a really good demonstration of it, of like a really good symbiotic relationship between printer and artist. Emily likes to describe it as this intense collaboration, and I think that's partly
It's a
why.
collaboration, right.
Because you have a lot of the technical know-hows, and oh yeah, let's figure out how to do that. Oh, you need to get this color to pop more. Okay, so this is how we do it. So there's like this really in-depth hacking process that goes on between like somebody like you guys, and we get to watch that happen and see the results of that happening right here.
It's true. Just the use of, for instance, carborundum in the beginning. You know, I didn't know what to do, and then we had an answer to use it.
So do you think you've become better at printing as you've gone
I rely
along?
on my.
Yeah. Do you think you guys have gotten better? I mean, I have to say, like going through your prints, there is a way that your language, from my point of view in the studio, I'm looking at all these things in front of me, and I see that like 1989, you guys were definitely experimenting. It goes one direction, then another, and back and forth. By 1991, you're just sailing. I mean, there's like hit after hit after hit. Yeah. It's fantastic.
I remember coming at 9:30, 10, and leaving in the morning, and leaving at 9 o'clock at night, and taking a nap on the cement floor.
But it's also like you were kind of selective too, because Janice is working with the Carborundum, and then I was working with the silk Collagraph. So it was like you were really exploring two things in a very detailed way, but very focused. So it's not random at all, I think, you know, and those times were actually oftentimes simultaneously the same type of time period. And so you really very systematically have explored. And then we also explored a lot of Chincolet, you know, and then the gold. So we had these different periods of like trying this and trying that. And I love the pieces that are like layered with the color of the papers and, you know, embedding the paper in there. So
Transparencies.
yeah, so I mean, there's been different epochs of focus, you know, very focused. Yeah.
Are there any size limitations?
Well, we were working we did do some big prints.
So how does a Xerox 8.5 by 11 transfer?
Oh, we didn't do any Xerox that big.
No, I think that
Well,
series, yeah, that series is all like 8.5 by 11, just because it's faster and easier, and you get more things out of it. So that I think was part of the reason. But my press is 3660, so we could go very big, and we have in the past with the Collagraphs gone very, very large at certain points. So.
I have a question. Emily, you mentioned that you enjoy the feeling that it's like baking bread, that it's a magic experience.
It is a magic.
I'm looking around me, and it's just amazing to me that each piece has its own emotional and physical presence to it. And I'm just curious about 30 years of producing these beautiful prints, how you're able to come up with each one is so different, and so the colors are all different.
Well, and I also feel the same thing with my painting. I want each one to be different and not one image done in different colors. So each one is a new experience. Each one has to take you to a place. With print, it's magical. Something happens once it's in the press, and you absolutely don't know what it's going to look like till it comes out. And you lift the blankets, and you got it. But
So
I want to encourage you all to print. I mean, I think my first print were little linoleum cuts for Christmas cards, you know. So, and my mother was an etcher. Well, she did a lot of etching. So I had a very nice, she used to work at Atelier 17, which was run by an English printer who was here during the war in the 40s. And, you know him. And so she did a lot of soft ground work. And so I had that
So you were
opportunity.
exposed to it as a young person?
Yes, yes.
We still have some of those very, very first prints. We didn't put them up here. That would have been going back too far.
With the little illustration
Yes.
one?
In Talia.
Would you say that the once the blankets are down and it's out of your hands,
I mean, once it's going through the press.
yeah, is that one of the draws? Is that what leads you to printing? I mean, sort of that release of not knowing?
Not knowing is, yes, but that's, yeah, but I'm sort of, that's my mantra.
I think this is going good. If anybody else, we can just keep going with the Q&A. That's kind of what Emily wanted this. Emily wanted this whole thing to be Q&A. We have
Please, Petey.
Hi, Emily.
Hi, neighbor.
This is a weird question, but do you have a favorite, most satisfying printmaking process?
Process? No. I told you, it's like Mae West. She's with the, who's her favorite? The man she's with. So the process I'm doing is my favorite because that engages you, you know. No, I don't
And
like favorites.
sometimes two at a time.
Mae West?
Can you say more about the difference between printmaking and painting? Because, you know, these very much resemble your paintings, but they come from a whole different...
And for one thing, print is a smaller format, and it's easier to encompass the whole thing. If I put say I'm making a print and I want to put a whole drop a plate of inked up white or green or something on the print, you run it through and you have it. I can't do that with a painting. So painting's different. And also the scale and then paper, and I love working on paper.
But then also the fact that this goes through a transformative process that is out of your hands.
Exactly.
Is a different.
Exactly. See if I can run my paintings through a press. See what happens.
That would be transformative.
I'll do something.
Please.
It doesn't seem fair in some way to ask you to talk about what's a visual feeling, but when you lift the blanket, what is it about a print that makes you say, this is a success, or this isn't quite what I wanted?
Well, it's also like a painting. You just sort of know. You get a sense. Also with prints, you have to wait till they dry. There's a little more, and you have to wait till they're flattened. So it takes a little more time. Yeah. Time is a big ingredient.
Well, that brings up another part of your process is even with a lot of these, you're not quite settled on the orientation.
Oh, no.
You'll see actually in some of these where the chop is on the top as opposed to the bottom in kind of the standard position, where Emily's decided actually it looks better this way and has rotated it and signed it in a different direction, or signed it in two places, which is something that your mom used to do as well. And that's something you do in your paintings. Yeah, I mean that's something that I like because you'll visit something 20 years later and it still does something new to you in terms of its composition.
What are the mediums in all of these? Are they all acrylic or oil?
I never use acrylic.
You never use
Ever, except to mix with the Carborundum, but that's the only as a glue.
So it's all oil.
I didn't even look at acrylic. The problem with acrylic, A, it's plastic, and B, it dries too fast, and you can't wipe it out. With oil, you can find the pettimenti or whatever's underneath and sort of work your layers. Is that satisfying, Jonathan? Jim?
I noticed that in a couple of your GTW prints, the Garner Tullis, the green one up here called That Kept, and then there's another one back in the back part of the gallery called Trace. There are hand strokes which appear to be made with a pastel crayon or an oil paint stick on top of the print. Is that correct, or is that something that was pressed into it? And
I'll have to look at it. A wolf does that, but I don't do that.
you don't do that at all. Okay. And there's one up on the stair landing as well with a square of blue. So that was all done underneath the on the plate.
It's printed, yeah.
It is, okay.
Yeah.
I was curious about that, so I'm glad to know. Thank you.
You never touch the prints after they're printed. You never go in again unless you're reprinting. You don't go in again with pencil.
I don't work on them.
Yeah.
But I mean, I might, if I want to work on them again, I put them through a press. Right. Printing's a wonderful, magical experience. I can't urge you all to find a workshop or a place to do it. Petey.
Somebody in the back there?
How many plates do you often use on the monotype? And do you often have to put the light color underneath, or and then layer on top of that with darker, or does it not matter?
It does matter.
Yeah.
Well, I think I sort of stop at 5 plates because the paper will disintegrate. No? More?
I think more. You do layer more on some of the small ones, at least.
Yeah.
Some of those solar plates, definitely.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. Come on, Emily, yes.
No, be really direct, yeah. Just
Well,
one more
also,
time.
I
Let's do it.
wrote a little bit about that too, that we sometimes do a layer of white.
That's right.
Or like a very light.
That's to get back to the base.
And
right.
we kind of let that dry, and so that it becomes yet another layer. It doesn't really cover everything up, and actually when things print on top, it actually takes it differently in different spots.
Right.
And that kind of revitalizes it in an interesting way. Not everything, but sometimes we do that on some that need to be just kind of covered up.
Yeah, sometimes that white is enough too. You've definitely
Right.
left some
Yeah.
pieces where
Right.
that causes this nice veil and.
And then what's underneath bleeds through, or sort of like ice.
But when
in
you
a
walk
pond.
around, you'll see some of that. Like even that piece right next to PD back there, I think, is a case where you've layered it up so that it stands up. I love that technique.
And then sometimes you can roll on top too.
Right, we've surface rolled it.
Surface roll the plate?
Yeah.
Yeah. Instead of inking in, just brayer the surface, so it'll kind of print like a negative, but it also can change very much the surface as well.
So when you go over with white, is that ink white?
Yeah.
Not, yeah, and not watered down or, well, it's,
No, it's always oil-based, but it
oil,
might
so-
be oiled a little bit, but
Yeah.
we'll let it dry.
right.
So a lot of times we'll print and we'll have maybe, 15 or 20 prints out. We'll let them dry and then we'll look at all of them and then Emily will decide which plate, which color will go for the next run.
Right.
So I do really think some of them go through,
Yeah.
Easily
That's that
more
time
than
ingredient,
five.
right?
but especially for the small ones. I think that's part of the magic of the small thing, that it could go fast. You could accomplish a lot
Exactly.
in a small, one time.
Please?
So how do you decide how to start? Like, is it a feeling? Do you go for color schemes? Is there it's fall?
I don't want to know. You just sort of do it, Yeah. I don't want anything preconceived to get in the way. Sometimes, even when I taught at Hunter, I used to have students work with their non-dominant hand to get their minds out of the way. That kind of challenge.
But does Lisa just set up some paints, or how is it? I mean,
Oh,
do you
yes.
set those up?
Oh, when I get there, there's these wonderful puddles of ink. Oh, it's litho ink, right?
Yeah, litho ink usually.
Yeah. And then we also use some type of medium and then card that on.
Sounds sort of like you experiment, each one is an experiment to see what happens.
I love it.
Put down a little of this and leave a little of that and see what happens and add something to it.
But also you're starting oftentimes with a set of the plates already. So that's your matrices, that you have all these matrices out in front of you. So you're choosing those, so unless you're making the matrix.
But you
Which would
define
help inform your color choices, right?
if you define matrix.
Well, these we would define that as matrix. I think that's a silk Collagraph, isn't it?
It is,
Yeah.
It's the bottom. No, it's the rip off.
Oh, it's the.
We ripped the whole.
yeah, right.
It's
Yeah,
what was
never
left.
Yeah.
So I liked it, but there was a whole other silk thing. We ripped it off.
Yeah. Well, she's actually the only person I've ever known to do that. The silk Collagraph has a layer of silk on it. That's what it's
That's the
being
ink pad,
clad.
right?
And so she came in one day and she didn't like she didn't like the plate, and so she just took and ripped it off. And so it left this impression of the silk, kind of like an aquatint, and we inked it up and it looked great. So it was just such a
grab
surprise.
it,
I've never
right.
seen anybody do that. It's very
You
cool.
encouraged me.
Do we have any more questions?
Let's see.
So do you work on a piece until you feel that it's done, or will you often put it away and
Put it away,
bring it away,
yeah.
bring it out the next
And look,
day?
I like that ingredient of time. That's why I like doing a lot of work and then going back a week later or 2 weeks later and sort of reassessing, sort of let it gel. Yeah. And time is very important. They don't teach it in art school, but it's important.
It's like almost a new view each time. You put it away and then you look at it, you see it in a new,
Oh, yes.
new eye.
Right.
In one of your books, I noticed in the foreword that there was a discussion of how we must consider your work in terms of other senses, like taste and smell.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was a really interesting comment, because they feel as immediate as those sensations to me.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you'd like to say anything more about that.
No, I'm so pleased you brought it up. I don't remember saying it. But yeah, there is a sensibility that crosses tactile, not quite sound, I don't know, yeah.
Well, but at the same time, I sense kind of there's also the emotional component, which I feel is somehow consistent in spite of all these images being so different from each other. I get, some sort of emotional consistency.
Well, if the emotion is uplifting, I like it, but I sort of stay away from the word emotion. I'd rather think of structure or something.
But it can be stirring at the same time.
Yeah, yeah.
And each person can have their response to it, I would say. That's very, you do like to evoke a response in that kind of situation. Yeah. What I also like to, think about when you go into your process is just like your level of audacity, I would call it.
Oh, that's...
because I feel like having gone through the print process myself, and I think a lot of other people who have had this experience with their own art or anything, you become very attached to something that you've created. You see a little gesture that you made and you really are just like, this is it, I won. Emily,
and then you got to get rid of it.
Exactly, see? Emily has no druthers ready. She's
no, sometimes I do love. Yeah.
You do love, but you're also willing to say this is, if you're a little suspicious of that level of preciousness, I should call it. And I think that takes a real bravery to kind of go into and and extract and also to rework something that might have been finished in a lot of other people's eyes. There's plenty of times where I feel like something's fully cooked and you're like, no, give it back. And I love that, I love that. It's taught me a lot as well.
Were you that way since childhood, just starting fresh? It's not something that came as you worked and worked and worked, but being able to just get rid of or rip it up, or has that always been with you?
I hope so. I don't quite, look back and analyze it that much, but yeah.
And we have a daughter here. We can ask how long it's been part of the equation.
I can talk about bread baking. Did a lot of that.
Could you say something about your origins and your beginnings at Bennington and the big Bennington and Bennington Mystique and Frankenthaler and Greenberg and the...
Greenberg,
Well...
New York, that's my... New York is my...
You didn't go to Bennington?
Yes, but that was phony. I went there for 2 years. And it was good for me.
The inspiration of
Bennington
spreading color.
Was good because it got me out of New York, and I'd never been. I was a New York kid and went to New York High School of Music and Art, and then I went to Bennington. But I found the faculty up there was more talk than anything else. So I, on a non-resident session, I went by Cooper Union and I transferred to Cooper. And that was good.
How long were you at Bennington?
2 years. And then I went to Cooper 3 years. And then I didn't have any degree, so Cooper kids could go to Yale for a year and get a degree. Only the year I wanted to do it, out there, the school decided to do 2 years. So I thought, 7 years of college. I'm not going to do it. And then I had this interview with Joseph Albers, and I said, I'd really like to do it just the old way, and he said, no. And I had a great satisfaction of having a job. I was helping somebody do mosaics, and the man I was working with also had worked with Albers, and brought him home to lunch. And I was so pleased to say, he said, "Oh, we didn't get any Fulbrights this year." And I said, "Well, I did." So I was so pleased. You know, there's a little, occasionally you get those wonderful moments.
So when did you start pouring paint? That's why there's a
Pouring.
There's a concept. Not every artist has this concept of spreading layers.
Well, it's a way of putting. I mean, you can use a brush. You can. It's a way of just getting paint on in an even way without a brush stroke. And in that sense, it's sort of like printing. It has an equivalent.
Well, there's an inspiration in there. So
I don't even like the word. I think the prints themselves or the painting itself leads you to the next thing. It does. That's the way I work. Okay.
I was talking to some people at the opening who were asking about your color usage, and that was an influence that you've talked about to me before with Jack Larson and analogous colors.
Right.
And figuring out how these colors work. What are you?
I went to Haystack School of Crafts when it was in its early beginnings, and I worked with Jack Larson, who was a weaver and a designer, and one day he came out with skeins of color, and it was all on a couple of broomsticks, and they were so beautiful. And he explained not to change a color by modifying it with black or white, but by another color that is a close color. And so that was, and actually Albers uses some of that too, Annie Albers especially. So that was a big change.
We could probably take a few more questions if anybody has one.
I'm just intrigued by your reference to Albers because I can't think of anything more polar opposite.
Oh, he'd hate it.
Well, some of us aren't too crazy about Albers.
No, but he was a friend of my mother's. No, but she was quite geometric, so they were friends. But Albers was. I don't know what I would have done if I'd gone to Yale, actually. I'm glad I didn't.
But you're still using a square format, right?
There's a story of my Wolf tells about Larry Rivers. He was working with Hans Hofmann, and Hans Hofmann said, a picture has to have 4 sides. So Larry Rivers came into Hans Hofmann with a little triangular piece of drawing and said to Hofmann, I think it was a Leonardo or something, a little piece, and he said, "Is this a work of art?" So Hofmann said, "Oh, that's Larry Rivers. He's always asking questions," and then he moved on. So. Techniques, please.
I'm curious about knowing that you pull quite a few prints and you let them sit for quite a long time, and then you go back in, have a fresh eyes, and go right back into it. Can you say a little bit more about that, or maybe you did, and I was walking
maybe
around.
That's a time ingredient. You sort of have to get away from it to see what it really needs.
And that's very similar to painting. So
yeah.
It's also similar to writing.
Probably. Yeah. And maybe music, of course. Yeah, the connective tissues.
Even gardening, similar to gardening. Leave it alone and see the survivors or the volunteers, yeah.
Bread, not so much.
Sorry.
It sounds like you get a lot of prints going at once, like you'll do
Yes.
a run, and the same with paintings.
The
where
same with
you'll
paintings, exactly.
Just kind of have, and then you'll look at them individually and come back.
That's a time ingredient, yeah. I don't start something and want to finish it all it's a final process. I want to work on it a little bit and then come back and let it somehow digest in my head, something.
You can do that with any art form.
Yes.
Does the stopping point become apparent in any?
I sort of say in that little video thing, I sort of feel it inside. You know, sometimes you feel it's right, and you feel, oh, you get that, in the sense in your tummy, you feel right. It's physical almost. Yeah.
Feels right.
Yeah. Yes.
These are all done?
Depends if I have the plates.
Sorry, I got another question. In your paintings and in your prints, I'm seeing a very different color sensibility. There's not many of the very, very hot pinks that I've seen. Well, yes, a few, but maybe it's because of the way it was curated. Do you choose colors differently when you're printmaking from when you're painting? Or is it pretty much just the same? What makes your socks go up and down?
Depends what Lisa has out ready for me to. It's a card. I mean, I like the idea of the gold on top of that one. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say gold is definitely something that you don't use.
Yeah, gold is nice. It's a metallic. It reflects, but it's opaque. It functions many ways.
Actually, I've noticed, I've gone around a couple of times, I was here last night too, and I love looking at these pieces, but the transparencies and the layers, the density of color, you know, there's so much variation. And I was walking around tonight, I noticed it. It's almost like the colors, the way they're perceived seem to shift a little bit depending on your perspective. Like walking one way, I was seeing a color in a certain way, and I turned and looked from the other side, and it looked different. And they were both in good light, you know, but it's almost because there's some transparency, there's some density, and then there's this overlap, you know. And it was just, and I did that a couple of times just to make sure I wasn't seeing things. But it's really interesting, you know, not just the color, but the density of the color and the layering.
I like the transparency. Yeah. Instead of mixing a color on the outside, you mix it on the plate.
Yeah, I love that idea.
And more control.
That's a great example of that right there, how that green is created and those different greens. And absolutely.
Yes.
Did you have a question?
Yeah, I was wondering, so when you're mixing your colors, does it ever get away from you and it's not kind of what you imagined and it goes too brown or gray on you and you give up, or can you?
I stay away from that. I can predict pretty much. Yeah. You know, there's some colors I avoid, like brown and green, but then sometimes it's a challenge. So, yes. What do you got, Jim?
Well, one of the features that I enjoy, and I've enjoyed talking about it, is the edges. To me, they become almost as important as the body of the print itself, where you throw the registration off just the slightest amount. So we have...
That's not on purpose.
I was curious about that because there's all kinds of information about the colors you use beforehand.
Clues.
I think it lends a degree of excitement and visual excitement, which I don't see in most paintings, for instance, where you have to work at making your edges do that. So I'm glad to know that it wasn't intentional, because I was not sure about that.
Yeah, no, I like to look at the edges and I'll think, oh, maybe this plate, I think one, the dark one was red. And
yeah, just the middle one over there, past contained, I don't remember the title, is a great example of that. Some of the solar plate prints do the same. A couple of the small ones here, the little brown one called Hope.
Right.
There's a purple edge at the top and at the bottom, but there's nothing like that in the middle of it.
Because the orange went on top of the purple. Right.
And it covered it all up, but that's the clue. We would have never known it otherwise. I'm glad for the mistakes.
Because it helps you I like to, when I look at a painting, I like to think how the painter painted it, you know. It's the same thing with how it evolved.
So, is there any situation where you've got a plate and the color isn't sufficiently dense enough, where you would repeat exactly the same plate?
I might. I think that one, the pinky one, next to, that's got a white underneath and then a pink on top.
Can I ask you about your studio? Do you work with noise, or do you work in quiet?
I used to work with music, but now I just, like, New York is so noisy, I just like that. Up here, I look out at the trees, yeah, no. It's sort of my little haven. Pardon?
You don't play New York Sounds here?
It's sirens on the highway.
Petey, how were you doing on time?
Actually pretty good.
It's 6.
It's 6 o'clock.
How about 2 more questions and then?
Emily, you have 2 studios here in New York.
Yes.
Do you take pieces back and forth?
Oh, of course. Yeah, I paint in the summer and
I know.
sell in the winter, what?
At the end of
Flog them in the winter, what? Yeah, no.
Emily likes 2 different lights, and there's definitely a different light in her studio here than there is in New York.
But I've been in your studio, some pretty big things there, but you still, if they're not done, you take them back to New York one way or another.
Poor Jim has to strap them in the truck, and they go up. That determines the size of the truck that we're going to take.
Any more questions? Well, thank you everybody for your questions. Please spend some time with the work. Also, just to let everybody know, there is actually a documentary about Emily that's on Vermont PBS right now. It's in the, I forget what the section's called, it's like the local programming, but if you go under there, you can find it's called Painting Experience. It just got premiered the other day. So please feel free to take a look and maybe answer some questions that you don't get a chance to ask tonight.
And also one more thing, there's a film that was made with Janice Stemmerman called The Intuitive Print that is a wonderful short 8 minutes, 12 minutes piece that is showing specifically the Carborundum process with Janice and Emily.
Okay.
So we have it on our website. So it's available to see and it's very stimulating. So yeah, thank you everybody. This is wonderful.